Jessie. Look, for me it's wonderful to be here tonight. When I looked around Brad's exhibition, I was so thrilled. And I think that, like a lot of you, I've followed what Brad's done over quite a few years. And to see how the work is contextualised into this space was absolutely amazing, because it shifts ground, you know, it makes you see these materials differently. So I guess for us talking about that today, like, my hope is to sort of draw a little bit more information out of Brad. I want to talk about violence in this show, because that's something new that's sort of popped up for this space and belongs to this space, I guess, and oppression and what that means for these inflated, wonderful works. But first, and we don't want me to be doing too much of the talking here, so first I'd like Brad maybe to talk a little bit about the process of inflating steel, because these sculptures are all made with a really sort of wondrous and magical sort of process that requires maybe a little bit of explanation, because it's innovative and it's exciting and it's dangerous, and it's a wonderful thing to behold if anyone's ever seen one of these works actually being inflated. So I'd like Brad, if you can, just to talk a little bit about that process, I suppose.
Okay. Yes, that works. Yeah. The process, well, I guess there's a few people here who have probably heard the story of how it started, which was watching Mythbusters. They're inspirational. Yeah. But they were trying to inflate some steel for some, I think they were trying to make a nose cone for a missile or something like that, trying to curve some steel with sort of limited equipment. And I guess for me, the thing I saw in that was, instantly I thought, this is fantastic. This is a way, when I saw they're welding two squares of steel together and putting a valve in and basically blowing up that parcel. And when I saw that, I thought, this is fantastic. This is a way I can get compound curves in steel, so that a piece of steel that curves both ways through both sort of axes. And then I thought that by trying this, that I'd then cut pieces out. They'd be formed, and I wouldn't have big presses or rollers or metal folders or, you know, heavy machinery to make those forms. So then, yeah, I'd cut those out and make kind of more kind of lyrical kind of sculptures, I guess. More sort of formalist approach to the way I was making work before.
So how much control do you actually have over it? Because, I mean, it's a dramatic process. It's not a material that's meant to bend like that somehow, or to be inflated like a balloon or something that you throw away. You know, it doesn't quite fit with our idea of what steel is. You know, steel is solid and immovable. And have any of them exploded? Like, I really like the thought of that moment where you go too far.
Yeah, well, I can't help but go too far. I think that's part of the process I like about it, is the kind of the sense of danger about it anyway, or the sense of not having complete control. Now that I've been doing it for like 3 years or whatever, I have a fair bit of control. So by choosing particular shapes, I know, I have a general idea, or a fairly good idea at times, of what the form, how it will form, depending on how much air I put in, or but particularly in the learning process, I had no idea. So it was, you know, I was always wanting to push it as far as I could to see then what would happen, how far it could go, how it would change if I just kept pushing and pushing.
But it's still not a controlled process like casting is, for example, in sculpture or carving. You know, like any processes like this are very much sort of minutely controlled. There is an element there where you have to leave it over to chance. Is there anything there that feels like it's out of your control in inflating them? Because, I mean, you've obviously said that you can cut shapes to sort of predict, but you can't completely predict what's going to happen there, can you?
No, and when I try something new, and a new shape or a new combination of shapes, I get surprises all the time. I think I know what's going to happen. And then in relation to the material, the thickness of the material, or, you know, the nature of that particular shape, throws up surprises and new things all the time. And that's the exciting bit,
No,
like
exactly.
that lack of control, because previously my work had been very controlled. I pretty much knew what I was going to get at the end, you know, it was always planned out, you know. I might have made a model to start with. So yeah, there's a whole series of planning and development. So by the time the work was finished, you know, getting close to finished, even a long way before that, I knew pretty much how it was going to turn out. And that's the exciting bit.
But for that change in your practice, and I mean, like looking at it right through, there are a lot of works previously that relate to the sea. They're quite abstracted forms. They relate to boats. They also relate to flotation devices. And while this technique is completely new, it still fits into that story for me. So what about that thing with the sea that you have?
Well, there's a bit of influence, that old bloke over there. Yeah, growing up on the water is an aesthetic that has been with me for my whole life. So, and around boats and working on boats on slipways, you know. So you're not just on top of the boat, you're actually working around the actual form of the hull. So those forms, the forms of sails, you know, the forms of sails filled with wind or not filled with wind, with too much wind or not enough, you know, all those kind of things, the movement of water, all those kind of things have informed the way I think about form and
But there are also
materials.
safety devices, and we've got straps that sort of hold things in place and stop, you know, that tether them in some way. And to me, that really relates to boats being tethered on a harbour, or well, I guess not a harbour that they're tethered on, but you know what I mean.
On a mooring? Or,
Yeah, a mooring,
yeah.
something like that. One of those things that you sort of twisted around.
Yeah,
I'm not a boater. But they are things, because of their very nature of something that floats, they could also escape. So I think that the strapping that you use on them, it's really interesting as well. And I'm interested in how that come to be such an integral part with these forms, I guess.
Well, I think one thing that's followed a lot through my work is that kind of contest of opposing forces has always kind of been evident in my work, and I guess that sort of restraint against this pressure for me was a kind of natural way to approach exploring the possibilities of this work as well.
So a lot of the, like in at the Curve Gallery, when the exhibition opened, there was also a display of your work. There were very bright sort of poppy works, and they looked like devices that, you know, like life jackets and things that are used to resuscitate or save. You know, they have that sort of connotation to them. Something very different is happening in this space. And I think that looking at them side by side and walking into this space, this violence was really interesting for me, because it's an absolute response to the lockup and its history. And I'd like you to talk about that. Like, you know, you must have come in here and cased it out and thought about how the work fitted in the place, but it does it so very eloquently, I suppose. So what did you pick up from here that you then, you know, decided to filter, I guess?
I guess the great opportunity with this place was that, you know, I first probably encountered this place seriously when I did my master's exhibition in 1999, 2000. So I've known this place fairly intimately since then. I mean, then it was just the main gallery space, and no one was exhibiting in the cells or anything, but you experienced them, you knew them. And then in between those times, I worked here helping Jessie and Courtney and hanging exhibitions, so I got to know the space kind of a lot more intimately that way as well. But just as much as the understanding and getting a feel for those physical spaces is the imaginative spaces that they kind of conjure. And so much about my response to these works is just as much my imagined kind of sense of what happened in these spaces, not necessarily actual historical events, knowing some of the events that took place, but it's just as much an imagined kind of reaction or response to them.
But
the drama of it is.
But the works in, like the inflated works in here, then become, I think, for all of us viewing the works, you know, a metaphor for the body. So I was actually surprised by the amount of empathy I felt for these things in different cells and the way they were squashed into the space and the impression of that, which is very different from your other works, I think. But I think the hammer for me was looking at the film works and seeing you stalk around them like a serial killer, because you're not like that. So can we talk about that?
Maybe you don't know me well enough.
Don't scare me, Brad. But they're violent, and they're a particular type of violence, and I think that it's a particular type of violence that we all understand in this space, viscerally, through our bodies, and it's actually quite hard to verbally articulate, you know, what that is, but it's kind of scary. So
well, yes. That's the best way to respond to, like for me to respond to it too, is because it's not something. Once again, I go back to it not being saying a specific story or a specific moment in history or something like that. It's about that thing, that gut feeling, that sense of, you know, of dread or, you know, of danger or whatever in a space or so on. But yes, those forms, for me, the inflated forms are they're kind of almost the epitome of angst in a sense, because they're this moment of stored energy ready to burst, ready to, you know, if we think of violence, someone ready to explode, you know.
They're also an in-breath, you know, to me, you know, it's one of the actual responses to it, is to kind of almost hold your breath, particularly when pieces are sort of squashed in the middle or something. You're kind of aware of that in terms of your own lungs, in terms of your own body, you know. I think that's an interesting thing. And there's a performative thing happening here as well. Like in the films, you're performing a sequence, and you've also, I guess, taken this sculpture into a realm of really performing the process of making sculpture as well in different ways. Can you talk about that a little bit, about the performance that?
Well, I did actually enjoy taking that, you know, assuming that role. It was sort of, you know, the old cathartic.
Yeah, I think give it a go.
Yeah, you know, it's a good way to release tension, you know, and a lot of tension builds up when you're blowing those things up. So yeah, so I did enjoy that. I guess, you know, if we go into a gender sort of thing, you know, particularly males are pretty good at storing tension and anger and so on, and I particularly in my younger years, I had plenty of that, you know. So I guess people nodding over there. I mean, but I guess, you know, particularly as a late teenager in your 20s, you know, you understand that kind of anger and that kind of, for me anyway, that kind of position that you could find yourself in. So I guess it's channeling that to assume that role anyway. So I enjoyed playing the role, but knowing, but it's an empathetic, from my point of view, it's a kind of empathetic role that I took, in the sense, if that makes sense. But
yes, but it's also an interesting thing when it comes to sculptural works that are fine artworks, and we all know that they're things that you should handle carefully, you know, and look after and keep in a pristine condition and be careful with, I suppose. And you've beaten some of these things, you know, it's obvious to me that there's been aggression. So how does that sit with making a fine art object, I suppose, that you know, should be treated carefully?
I reckon that was a breakthrough.
Yeah,
There was a lot of thought before that, you know, and a lot of, and in the end, really, I lost, right? Because in the end, I decided to leave one alone. If you noticed in that cell where those beaten ones are.
I did notice that actually.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I reconciled that was the next one in line, and that's the way I think about that one. That's the next one to be dragged out. If you think of the video work, you know, dragged out and beaten kind of thing. So,
yes.
But probably just as equally, it was because it's being used to making work that is to be preserved and pristine and looking after surface and looking after the form the way you made it, to then beat the hell out of it that's sort of stepping into new territory, which I have really enjoyed and will continue to enjoy, I think.
But did you have a moment there, like with the inflation, I think something that's evident is that they could explode, you know, that you're pushing it to a point where it might break and you haven't got complete control over it. Is that a sort of getting back of control, you know,
Oh, yes,
you know,
I kind of think it is. I think it's perfect because that was what the intent was for this site. But yes, definitely it's a way of, it's taking back control and that idea of reforming as well. Yeah.
And so what about your choices of how many objects to have in the space? Because I think whenever you're faced as an artist with a space to put your work in and to do it sensitively, and I mean the lockup is loaded. I mean it's a hard space to put artwork in. You know, I've done it before as well, and I think it's absolutely, there's so much going on here. It's really hard to decide how much is too much or not enough. You know, what colours to use, how to refine things like that. And I think you've been really quite minimal about it. And I think in this essay about your work, I sort of looked at your work as being a mixture of minimalism and pop art. It's a really weird thing, actually. You know, where you've got something that's like Klaus Oldenburg's soft sculptures with these really cold things like Donald Judd's, I don't know, repetitive forms. They're often reflective, but I'm interested in reflective objects as well. So how did you decide to put sort of so few works in the space and the sort of clamping and things that's happened with them as well?
Well, I think the isolation, there's kind of the isolation and the solitary figure kind of thing. So it was very much what informed deciding that, you know, there's one object in the space. I think giving the forms their moment, in a sense, or their space, to be engaged with just as that, to encounter just as that thing, as opposed to being confused with too many elements. So that's the way I think about exhibiting works anyway, but that was, you know, important in this space, that they were these isolated things. And once again, the grouping of the ones in the end was really that idea that that sense of them not, you know, them being a massive humanity, if you like, or you know, the recordings of, you know, history. Another one who's been damaged by, you know, that kind of treatment. So that's why the numbers in that space, as opposed to the individual kind of torture, I guess.
But also the actual clamping of them, which I imagine is an interesting thing to actually make happen through the inflation process. So are they clamped while you're inflating them?
They're clamped while I'm inflating them, but they're not clamped with those clamps. But those, I made particular kind of clamps or presses that matched the props that I used in there, and I inflated them in the studio. So I had the control and of course not having any chance of damaging the cells. I did have one sort of grand idea. I won't go into the detail of the work, but a grand idea of a work for the main gallery space, which the engineers knocked on the head because it was going to put too much pressure on the building, basically. So I had, yeah, I mean, the whole kind of work, the installation, the way the works came together, really came together quite late, and once I got in the space as well, so that, well, you know, I had all these backup plans. I guess I thought this work will work best in this cell, but if not, according to the dimensions of the cell, you know, I've had them measured and everything like that. Potentially I'd swap these two around. So I'm going through all these kind of scenarios depending on how the work, I'm not making the absolute decision until I'm putting the work in the cell to actually see if it's working the way I kind of intended. And I've gone off track there.
No, I don't think you really have, because like, I think what I was probably getting at there was that they fit so well in the space. It's actually hard to imagine that they weren't made there.
Yeah.
You know, so I guess that the process that makes them fit so very well you know, that's a series of devices that will work in different spaces and adaptability that you really thought of.
Yeah.
All the way through.
Well, as Jessie said, we've been thinking about this show for like 3 years, so I've been thinking about things. Yeah, do lots of that. So when it came to actually making the work, I had a fairly clear idea of how it will come together, but as I said, didn't know until I got into spaces. But the inflation with the clamping and with presses, that's when things get a bit more dangerous as well, because when you're just inflating a cushion kind of thing and it pops, really it just pops. It scares the hell out of you, you know, because you know it's going to happen, but you don't
want
exactly
to see it
when.
happen, actually.
Yeah, and it essentially it splits open a little bit and scares you. But those ones, if the clamp gives way or the brace gives way in some way, then potentially we have part of that apparatus flying off and hurting myself or somebody watching. So they're more nervous times, and some of those I inflate on my own. Often there's people, particularly in the studio, watching when I'm inflating, because there's lots of people potentially around, so they watch. But often the clamping ones I'll do on my own. A couple of times I hide behind things.
You don't get that feeling from these videos, I can tell you that. You don't see you hiding behind anything. But it's interesting, because I think you've inflated a work here before in the lockup, and I think the way people talk about that event is really exciting, because it did do this thing where everyone sort of held their breath waiting for something to go terribly wrong. How was it to do?
There was a lot of energy in that room.
But was it worrying?
Oh, I was scared. I was scared shitless, I can tell you. Yeah. I did a fair bit of research actually about air pressure and stuff before that. So I had the air pressure fairly low in case a hose popped off and the air blasted somebody and that kind of thing.
It's a very contained space
very
to have
contained.
that action happen.
That was the end cell for those who don't know, with the big work in the end. And we fitted probably 20 people in there, did we, or more?
I was sort of behind.
Yeah, maybe you're hiding.
I was safe. That's safe.
But yes, I was nervous and excited at the same time, and built the drama carefully.
But it is dramatic, and it is a process, and I think it's a sort of amazing thing for a sculptor to put his process on display like that, and it's not something we're really used to seeing. Only perhaps in process videos where there's time-lapse photography or something, and you see it happening over weeks or something like that. But this is so instantaneous, and there is this element that you can't control in it. And I think that's a really interesting dimension to present before people.
Yeah, I think the
Do you enjoy it?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I think the instantaneous thing, I talk about it a fair bit, because the instantaneous thing is one of the best bits as well, because once again, if I go back and talk about the planning of particularly large works, they might be planning over months and months, and and maybe the construction of it is over months too. It can be a ridiculously slow process, so you kind of lose that. It's easy to lose that excitement through such a long process. But that stuff, I mean, there's the preparation, the welding, the preparing and thinking about it, but the actual forming of it happens, in a couple of minutes. So it's kind of, it's happening in the moment, and that's what, I guess, then what led to the ideas of the process and the process as performance, kind of, and which led to the inflation in the cell, which led to this show.
I guess a couple of things that we haven't spoken of yet in terms of the show are the collaboration that happens when you're making film works or photography with people, because there's very much a sense that you wanted to achieve in those film works that inform, I guess, the whole reading of the exhibition. So it's really important to be able to work closely with people to achieve that end. And I think just looking at them, there's there's a real clarity of expression in that, which isn't, which is a hard thing to get with collaborative work often.
Oh, particularly when it was really, I've done one video work before these works, so I'm particularly excited how well it came out. I had this idea in my head, this sort of picture in my head of how these videos would come out, but communicating that to Moz over there, and making that happen, it just came together almost as I pictured it in my head, which is, I imagine with filmmaking would be difficult, can be difficult. It was a fantastic collaboration with Moz, and also who was there was Dean Belletich, who's a great long friend of mine and a person I've shared studios with and talked about art a lot over the years. So, and Dean's a photographer, so having the three of us kind of nut things out about how and them dragging out of me what it is that I'm actually wanting, the look and the mood and things. It really was a great collaboration, and
but it's sort of a risky thing to do as well in terms of masculinity and violence at the moment, I suppose. Like I can look at artists from the 70s who work with materials in a fairly violent way, and it was seen as very masculine, the whole area of sculpture, and I think you kind of tapped into that without losing anything of yourself in there. Like, and it's a long time in between those works from the 70s and now. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about putting yourself in that position? I feel like I've got to push this masculinity thing a bit.
Yeah. Well, I guess the best thing has, in a sense of the way people have responded to the work. It was always going to be a masculine approach, and partly that's because, I guess, there's a lot of conversation about violence and masculinity at the moment. So that was, at the top of the brain kind of thing, So really, it's my way of communicating, or getting that conversation out there without being sort of overtly political, or I'm not the kind of person who generally engages in, political or social kind of activism in a sense. I guess this is my way of, I guess this is my way of doing that, less overtly, I guess, partly because all those issues are complicated and I can't articulate it properly.
Yes, you can.
I can't articulate it in words.
No, but you articulate. I think that's probably the point to get to there, is that you do articulate that completely in materials, and actually, we read it. I think I'd speak for most of us here in saying that we all come in and we experience these objects as bodies, and we experience the violence that's acted upon them, and the way they're oppressed in the space as well. And how better? I'm not sure that verbally anyone could express that better than you have. In that form. It's a wonderful
that's
thing.
The pleasing thing, I guess, is that people have connected with the work in that way. And then I guess that brings up this work as well, which was a real concern for me, thinking about how that work would come together and how people would respond to it. Jesse and I talked about it a bit, and talked to Donna Fernando about that, because I was really concerned. Like, in the end, it's not a ridiculously blatant, explicit work, but it expresses things, right? But I was a bit worried about being the skinny little white guy talking on behalf of another community, someone else's on someone else's behalf. So that was my concern, big time, with that work.
So have you had much feedback around that? Has anyone spoken to you about it?
A little bit. I mean, when I talked to Donna about it, she was, she was so for the work. She knew my work as well, but she was so encouraging of me to do the work, because there was talk about whether it was whether it ended up being in the show or not, kind of thing.
It's a very aggressive work, the way it's hanging in the space there. I think that we, all sort of feel that. But I also think that with all of the works, that there are other meanings you can bring to them, and there are other ways to read things. Your choice of colours or metallic surfaces always works through that as well. I mean, Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think the metallic surfaces or the reflective surfaces are good in the sense that they draw in the environment, whether the environment is a static environment like the building, but also the people who are experiencing the work. So it brings the viewer or the participator into the work. I think that's what I enjoy about those kind of surfaces. The colour is actually is more, and that's why there's less of it in this show. The colour of the forms anyway is more about. It's more in relation to, well, either the safety devices, right, or the playful nature of the colour as well. Because, I mean, this work's fun, right? It was fun making this show, but the colourful ones are more about being, fun. I've so much enjoyed this process, this inflation process. It's given me an opportunity to have more fun making sculpture as well. So I guess that's why that colour as well, but also the relationship to, because things were looking like safety devices or whatever. So the colours are safety colours in a sense that you might find in kind of industry or in workshops and so on.
And the strapping works really well with that as well. But I think that the metallic ones are really interesting because they're almost like they become camouflaged in the space. And in the prison space, then you have a sense of the thing losing its form or becoming invisible or less important in the space. I'm not sure what it is, but I've always had the idea that anything that people can see themselves in, they kind of like. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but in this case, that doesn't hold because it's a way of them reflecting the environment around them completely, which is actually really impressive.
I think you're right about people liking to see themselves. Yeah. They do like my mirrored works,
yeah. Of course they do. And you photograph well in them, so a bit of distortion.
Yeah, they make for good selfies, and also those ones in there are also, they were meant to be rawer as well, so the surface is less treated, less mannered in a way. There's evidence of the welding as well, that hasn't been cleaned off or polished up or anything as well. So the process too is important, that for those ones that all the elements of the process are kind of there.
No, but I think that it works really well, and the limited sort of really bright colours are also really interesting in this space, and particularly when it curved across the road, during the opening, you had these kinds of inflation devices that were really bright and almost like toys or something. Then to come in here and think, whoa, this is a whole different atmosphere.
That's lulled you into a false sense of security.
You were indeed. But that's about context, and it's about your ability to reconfigure your work, I guess, in a different context and bring a whole new load of meaning to it. And I think that's a very subtle art. It's something that you've planned for a long time, obviously.
Well, context, I mean, that brings up the PhD kind of thing, I guess. The site specificity has been sort of paramount through thinking about this work as well, but my work for quite a long time. So with that comes context. Context is really important. And me thinking about it, what context can do to a work or not do to a work. And I've enjoyed playing with that. So having the two things happening at the same time, thank you, Lisa, was even helped build that kind of, that dialogue and that sort of change of context even better. But even if it's going, I think back to my show in Maitland, you know, in 2016. I'm always more and more I'm thinking about the context of how this works in the context of the actual physical space, but also the context of who might be viewing the work, all that kind of things. What people bring to the work is context. So what knowledge people bring of this place to see that work creates that context, you know. So that's kind of important the way when I'm thinking about work.
But it must be really satisfying then to look at the work after you've finished it and recognise the fact that these objects that were flotation devices in a different exhibition, or a bit like packaging materials or something, suddenly are like a body for people. You know, suddenly relate to the body in a way that's completely different. It's a, you know, it's a
sometimes they're the
change.
same shapes
Exactly.
or forms.
They're exactly the same shape. So putting them in a different space there is a really amazing thing.
Yeah.
I had a list.
Yeah.
Right, we haven't looked at it.
All right.
I think that we've actually gone through most of it, and I've had you talking about violence, which was quite important to me. So I suppose we could open to questions. And Jessie, I'm sure that some of you have some questions for Brad about the process and about what's ended up in here.
I've got a question. Thank you, love the show, and really great to hear you talk about the process. I would totally disagree with you when you say that you're not a politically or socially engaged artist. And not just on the basis of this work, but on the fact that you've been an artist here for a long time, really successfully. You've got the incubator space, you've got lots of students in the room and a lot of peers, and you've got this respect here, which is really pretty extraordinary to continue. I mean, you're very, it's wonderful, and we that's a tribute to you. But I'd just like to kind of ask you how you keep afloat and how you think about yourself as an island of Newcastle, where things get more and more constricted in a way, and just what drives
Good question,
you?
I guess it's the same thing that drives half the people in this, if not more than half the people in this room, creative people, is that, we have this kind of, you've got it, this sense of this thing that drives no matter what those barriers might be, social, political barriers that Newcastle faces continually, I guess when I said that I wasn't necessarily political in that sense, what I meant was more so verbally, or in a kind of more explicit way. I get that. Is that?
We get that. Kind of the quiet, and Ben Quilty would be the classic kind of nice guy example of that. He's an Australian artist too. And that's
so that's kind of what's getting. I guess I'm getting more. I grew up in a fairly political. I'm looking at my family over there. A fairly political environment, and went to one or two protests back in my day, as a dragged along to many protests and so it's political activism and stuff in my day. Maybe I was railing against that a little bit, being quieter about it, But I think as I'm getting older now, and also you mentioned the incubator, the fact that I found myself in that position of kind of leadership, I guess for the incubator, maybe at uni as well, I'm feeling more responsibility that I should be more politically engaged and trying to solve. Jessie and I have had those conversations recently too about trying to improve, if you're talking about the situation of the arts in Newcastle and funding and all of those kind of issues, I'm getting more involved in that kind of, I'm finding myself that way, Is that what you're getting at?
I just think it's really worth acknowledging, and that, creative people are a life raft really, and so well done, and the rest of the people here today.
Thanks, Una.
Any more questions?
We must have covered everything.
I've got a question. So we talked about the fact that this work in the context of the work brings elements into your practice that maybe haven't existed there, the violence, the rawness, the sense of kind of the unknowing, I suppose, and how successful this show has been. So I'm really curious in terms of whether there will be, and the video works even, whether there are elements that through the process of this show, working in this space, being able to work in these kind of, encouraged to really have a vision and push a vision, whether that's going to have any ripples for you, or how you think it might play out in your practice.
Well, I think it's going to play out. It's going to contribute massively to the way my work moves forward. I reckon it will depend on opportunities as well. I mean, the opportunity to have this show, talk about this show, and to really engage with this space is, as I said, what bred this show. So I think it would be, if I think ahead, it would be how I might respond to other opportunities. But I think I am enjoying, I guess, just taking the process as far as I think, as to wherever it could go, kind of thing. The opportunity to just keep pushing the process and exploring the engagement with, when I say the process, not just the fact that I'm inflating something, but the integral nature of this thing being forced by air, and those relationships of material and the ideas of contesting forces and binding and all that kind of stuff. So any opportunities to explore those in different spaces, in different contexts, I obviously would like to do. Also, I'm obviously really happy with the way the sort of recorded performative and the performative nature of the work has come together. So I'd like to see what I can do to play with that. It's a challenge because it's all come together beautifully for this site, but another site is a completely different thing. So how that comes together and how it realises, I've got some ideas, but I don't. It's.
I think it's also a confidence in terms of taking on that role of leadership as well in the community, and I'd also say for everyone who's familiar with Braddon's practice, you're a master craftsman. You take on materials and you know that material and its processes, and there's this beautiful refinement that happens. And then to see how this show and this kind of pushing and the rawness of the edges, and I think it's really interesting. But I'd also say, my hope for this show too is, we've had people come through the door who are international visitors who know art internationally and have said to us, this work could be anywhere in the world, and I think it's kind of, hopefully we can kind of hope to be using for artists to use these experiences to find ways to kind of get their practice pushed further into with the commercial markets. Lisa and I've had this conversation, or other museum spaces where these kind of opportunities happen. So, and how, I suppose it's that tricky thing for artists and galleries of how you then push through this really difficult marketplace and this really difficult kind of cultural environment. So I don't know what the answers are, but I really hope, there's a feeling that I want to...
Oh yeah, of course, aspiration. I'd like to, be invited into the Biennale and play on Cockatoo Island, with those spaces, of course, you'd like to have those opportunities, scale and budget and opportunity to just, to see what you can do,
Any other questions?
Yeah. Is the inflation a hot process or a cold process?
It's cold. right back at the beginning when I was first playing with the process, I did a few hot ones. Obviously, once you start getting to a big scale, you can need a bloody big kiln, yeah? So that was part of the reason, but the other reason why I chose to go just cold was it was just more remarkable to me. And I also like the way the metal crumples better when it's cold, and when it's hot, it actually it inflates more balloon-like, and you know the metal's more forgiving, right? What I like about the one of the many things on the list that I've talked about, but one of the things I do like about the process is that you're actually seeing what happens to the metal under that pressure in normal conditions, I guess, as opposed to going in a kiln and then it becoming something else, yeah? And also, I talked about how long things take. I'm still impatient, and I want things to happen quickly, and I want to cut out as many processes as possible. So that was another economical approach to the way I make decisions about the work as well. You know, cutting out a process. As I said before, sculpture can be really slow and tedious. So yeah, any way that I can make it faster and more immediate, the better.
Yeah, I'll take up Faye's invitation to, talk about violence. I'm interested in what this show says about violence and masculinity. And I mean, the fact that you played out violence, violent acts that you imagined had happened in this space, what might that say about you or about men in general or about humanity? You mentioned certain feelings of satisfaction. There may have been a desire to enact violence, or was this a criticism about these kind of behaviours?
I think it's kind of all of the above, Nick. I think generally the way I work is, the way I like to think about successful artwork as well, is that it kind of is all of those things, that it's open and ambiguous enough so that it can be all those things depending on how you want to respond to it. Can sound like the ultimate cop-out in a sense, but personally, I guess it's a critique about it's thinking critically about male violence, and as I said before about it's currently there's lots of discussion about it at present. It's never ending, isn't it, at the moment? We hear stuff about it all the time. But as I said before, personally, also thinking about me as a younger person who could get angry, particularly after drinking alcohol. It's revealing in that sense. Finding yourself as a late teenager or a young adult in fights at pubs or whatever like that, it's acknowledging that, right? So it's just as much about acknowledging potentially the person who I was and who I am now, I guess, if I think of it, if I psychoanalyze it, Does that kind of get at your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and also, but going also back to the point where I don't want to make a particular specific statement, because I think artwork needs to be more open than that. But also I couldn't articulate a single sort of argument or statement about these things. They're all complicated, so that's why the work's like it is.
Thank you.
I just say that I can imagine myself in that. I'm not a violent person, but I can imagine myself in that as well, and I don't think that the experience of anger is a totally gendered experience, really. So when I experience that work, I know that feeling, of being sort of, even with kids and just the oppressed moments that you have occasionally where you think, God, how am I going to cope with this?
Yeah.
And that's what the whole exhibition is about to me, the idea of that building of pressure and where it pops and holding it in this tenuous moment before that happens, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that it's interesting in terms of gender and the history of art and sculpture, but it's also really interesting in terms of humanity and how we all experience the pressures that we have in our own lives, I suppose.
And the beating was also about reforming, so that idea of reforming as well. So there was the violence, of course, and the idea of reforming. But if I talk about it just on the level of making sculpture, it was a creative act at the same time, you know. So
I
yeah,
can imagine that it was satisfying.
yeah. Oh yeah, and it was considered, you know. I wasn't just beating the shit out of it for the sake, you know. I was actually forming it again as well.
So is there one that's so beaten you couldn't put it into the show?
No, but they're hard work, because as they buckle, they get harder and harder to beat. So yeah. That's another question.
Excellent.
Okay. After the Mythbusters moment, I guess there was a fair bit of experimentation. And I've seen a lot of your expanded works, but not everything. How big have you gone? How small have you gone? And is there a limitation? Like, have you got dreams of
It's kind of relative in a way. The biggest I've gone is probably that work that was in the Body Corpus show for Newcastle Gallery in that Hunter Red show. That's probably the biggest. Actually, the work in the end cell is close to. It's like one of the longest ones. The bigger ones are kind of easier, right? Because there's more surface area in relation to the thickness of the material, so they give more. It's the smaller ones that have been the most problematic.
So how small?
Well, the first one that I blew up basically was like the size of a pencil case, right? And it was quite thick material. I think it was 1.6 mil material, whereas those ones in there are like half of that. They're 0.75. So, well, it got smaller, but the material's thicker in relation as well. So I was trying to blow that one up, and I was doing an experiment where I was heating one section of it, one little area of it, bright orange, so that hopefully it would make a little bubble kind of thing. That didn't happen.
Oh,
I just kept pushing more air into it and more air, and then it just popped open, like busting the zipper open on your little pencil case. And it jumped. You know, it was on the ground, and it probably jumped about this high, and no bits flew off or anything like that. But it scared the hell out of me, of course. So the smaller ones are problematic. So the smaller I get, the thinner the material needs to be, really.
I think we can get up to building size.
Yeah, it's just they're very hard to handle, because you can imagine once you're welding two sheets together, they're starting to get heavy and handle, but they're floppy, right? Because they've got no structure to them when they're flat before they're inflated, so they're all floppy and they're really hard to to manage.
Are they all just two sheets, or have you actually welded together?
Yeah, no, I've
multiples?
welded multiple sheets, which are more complicated. So then I make a little often make a little cardboard model, or like a pattern of how these things will go together, and once you start getting into multiple forms, some of them are over the road at leases. Every time you add those kind of things, you get all these different surprises. Yeah, and relationships of forms. You
don't have to stop.
Yeah, where it pulls or doesn't pull, and things like that.
Hi, I just wanted to know about how much research you went into the history of the actual building, and if you had made a distinction between the female and male cells, and if that played a factor, and how much research you went into brutality in prisons and in being held in lockups.
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't go particularly deep in research about what actually happened, accounts of what happened in the space. As I said before, it was more about the imagined violence of incarceration. I've read lots of stuff over the years, and sometimes, historical things, but also novels, particularly, early days in Australia, so it's kind of informed by that, but that's what I was saying before, was that it was very much about my imagined, experience of what happened in this place. And what was the other bit?
The thing about the female cells, because it's such a site-specific.
Yeah, that's right, and
show.
I guess that's why that work is sort of pinned to the ground. I guess that was a little sort of, maybe people didn't pick it up, but it was sort of little more subtle sort of statement. It is subtle, I guess, but I knew those were the women's cells, and I was thinking about what I would do in the women's cell. Not so much the video work there, but I guess that's more of a repressed kind of work. That one more because it's pinned down to the floor kind of thing. That's the way I was thinking about that. Yeah.
Another.
How vulnerable are the finished works to damage in storage or in the hands of small children, let's say?
It depends on which works. Like the material I've used mostly for this show is 304 stainless steel, and it's the 2B grade. So it kind of scratches. Stainless steel actually scratches fairly easily. You would probably know from your stainless steel appliances.
Of dints.
Of dints. Yes, they can be dinted. Yeah, because it's a bit like, it's similar to your car. If you've got a big sort of flat panel in your car kind of thing, or maybe it's just got a little bit of a curve to it, where it's got the least support. Yeah, if it gets bumped or whatever, it can get dented and stuff like that. Some of the issues I've had over the time when I send them off to get powder coated, because most of the coloured ones are powder coated, they come back with one or two more dents than they arrived with, because they're hanging on racks and they're pushing them through and they bump into something else, and they don't understand that it actually will dent pretty easily.
Can I just ask about that really quickly? Like, given sort of extreme heat at the moment or extreme cold in other parts of the world, does that have an impact?
That's a good question. A lot of them actually have a hole. The painted ones usually have a hole because they've been discreetly a hole somewhere because they've been hung up or something, but not necessarily. And it's a minimal thing. We had to think about that for the clouds up at Maitland, because those things are it's a sort of structural work and so on. And the engineer decided that there wasn't enough of that sort of expansion and contraction to warrant any kind of breather hole or anything like that. So
I just wondered if that had the potential to self-explode. Which is kind of a nice thought, that you leave people with a tension.
Maybe if we left some water in there, the water boiled. What do you think, Andrew? Yeah. There was a question over there, I think. I don't know if it's still there. Yeah.
I guess my question goes to the fact that this is notably a PhD research approach to this, and one of the greatest comments I've heard this evening is you describing what a site-specific work looks like, and I think we're all reflecting on now. Have you found the process of writing, thinking about the historical context, the different social, political ideas that are coming out, and the direct material practice, do do you think that going through that process has really helped you articulate things like you are doing right now?
I'm glad I pointed you out to ask that question. I said to Faye, don't talk about the writing. Yes, it's like this, the whole, like when I kind of took on the PhD a little bit casually to start with. I had no expectation that it would change my practice, change the way I thought about my work so much. And then, you know, the research in relation to that, those two things feeding into each other has been fantastic. Talking about the writing here, I've still got a bit of writing to do, so that's the hard bit. But it has been, for me, it's been a fantastic process, and I'd say that surprised, really. I mentioned I did my masters, and when I did that, I said, it was a harrowing experience, and I said I'd do my PhD once I forgot how harrowing that was, and I haven't forgotten now how harrowing that was. So yeah, it's been a surprise too, and really enjoyed the process and the way it's changed the work, and it's made me think of work differently, and the way I teach students differently too, I think. Really encouraging them to open up to research, really, yeah, and the possibilities.
Excellent. I think we'll wrap it up unless anyone's got anything burning they need to ask. Well, if you'd like to, Lisa?
I would just like to actually thank Braddon. I am Lisa Hu from Curve Gallery, and it's been an amazing project to actually collaborate with the lockup, do that duplicitous thing. You know, we were sort of saying this is the dark side. Curve had the more poppy works, which is much more the light side. But yeah, I just wanted to say congratulations to Brad. I think we're really privileged to have artists in our community, you know, in Newcastle, working at this level, gathering this many people that actually want to get really further down, drill down into what an artist is doing. And yeah, absolutely. Congratulations, Brad.
The perfect note to finish on. Another round of applause. Thank you, Faye.